The cry in the wreckage asterisk. The stars outside shimmered like a silent ocean of lights. But inside the cockpit of the rescue shuttle Icarus, everything was tense. Dre sat in his chair, eyes fixed on the blinking distress signal on his screen. Was weak, broken, as if the sender had barely managed to send it. Most signals in this area were either pirate traps or wrecked drones, but something about this one felt different. It came from the edge of the quarantine zone, a place ships were warned not to go. Still, Dre was curious, maybe foolishly so, but curiosity was what had kept him alive in deep space. The shuttle glided through the black void, lights scanning. The debris field ahead, wreckage floated everywhere, scraps of alien metal, broken beams and burnt cables twisting slowly in zero gravity. Then he saw a half-buried alien craft, cracked open like a crushed can. Its hull was marked with symbols Dre didn't recognize, but it had once been beautiful. Now it was just ruins. He wore his exosuit and climbed out through the side hatch, stepping onto the remains of the ship. Every step echoed through his boots, the silence pressing hard against his ears. Inside the wreck, sparks flickered and smoke drifted in slow waves. Then he heard it, a voice, not a machine, not a system echo, but a real voice, soft and shaking. "Please," the voice said. "Please help her." Dre's heart stopped for a second. He followed the sound deeper into the wreck until he reached a broken chamber. There, hidden behind a half-fallen wall, was a small alien child, no taller than his waist. Her skin was light violet, her eyes glowing faintly gold, and her hands trembled as she clung to the body of a larger alien woman. The woman's eyes were shut, her body stiff, shaking in rhythmic pulses, as if something inside her was malfunctioning. The child looked up at him, fear and hope mixed in her face. "Please fix my mom," she said again. "She won't stop." Shaking, Dre knelt beside them, scanning quickly with his portable med tool. There were no open wounds, no bleeding, no broken bones. But the readings made no sense. There were spikes in neural activity and energy patterns he'd never seen. It was like her body was rejecting itself, her brain firing signals in loops. The child reached out and grabbed his sleeve. "They did something to her," she whispered. "She was fine until we ran away." He didn't ask who they were, not yet. He knew this was bigger than a ship crash. He looked around and saw no other bodies, no signs of a crew, just the child and her mother, and something else. Every log file in the ship's core had been wiped clean. He took a breath, then lifted the woman in his arms as gently as he could. "All right," he said. "I'll try." Back on his shuttle, he placed the mother in the med bay and gave the child a thermal blanket. She curled into a chair, eyes never leaving her mother's face. Dre began scanning again, but once more the results confused him. Her biology was part organic, part machine, but not in a normal way. It was like someone had fused alien flesh with neural tech at a level humans hadn't yet reached. And the tech was glitching, sending shocks through her nervous system every few seconds. "That was the shaking, Yanali," the girl said when Dre asked her name. She said her mother's name was Fess. Yanali didn't cry, not even once, just held her blanket and kept asking softly, "Is she getting better?" Dre didn't lie. "I don't know yet," he said, "but I'll do everything I can." As the shuttle turned back toward the neutral space lanes, something stirred in the blackness behind them, unseen by Dre. A small dark probe activated in the wreckage and sent out a silent signal. Far away, aboard a hidden ship cloaked in stealth fields, a light blinked red. A figure in a dark suit turned toward the signal and whispered, "Experiment 7B is still alive." Back inside the shuttle, Dre ran more scans, adjusted neural dampeners, and kept watching the monitors. Fess's body kept trembling, and her brain patterns were wild, but there was no coma, no shutdown. She was trapped alive inside her mind, but unable to speak or move normally. It was like someone had locked her inside her own body. Yanali sat beside her, humming a quiet tune that sounded like a lullaby. "Please fix her," she said again. "You're human, right?" Dre paused. Yes, he said. Why does that matter? Yanali didn't answer right away. She looked up at him with tired, glowing eyes and said, because they said only a human can undo what was done. Dre felt a chill run through him. What had these two escaped from? And what exactly had been done to them? As he watched the trembling woman and her quiet daughter, he realized something terrifying. This wasn't just a rescue. He had been pulled into something far more dangerous, and someone somewhere was already on their trail, but he wouldn't abandon them. Not now, not ever. Because the child hadn't begged for escape or food. She had asked him to fix her mom, and that, Dre decided, was a mission he could not walk away from. The woman who couldn't be scanned. The med bay lights dimmed without warning, and every scanner screen went black for a split second when they came back on. The sensors reading Thess's body were flashing and confusion data scrambled. Diagnostics unreadable. Dre frowned, tapping the display again. He ran the scan once more, slower this time, using 3 different protocols. Still, the result was the same: no readable biological structure. That's not possible, he muttered. No one can't be scanned. Thess's body lay still, except for the subtle, disturbing tremors that pulsed through her limbs. Her eyes were open now, but unfocused, glowing faintly in colors no human eyes should produce. Yanali sat beside her, clutching her mother's arm tightly, whispering soft alien words that sounded like lullabies. Her small hands trembled too, not with fear, but with something deeper, something broken. Dre had seen trauma before, but this wasn't just fear. This was knowing. She's not sleeping, Yanali said softly. She's still there, but she can't talk. Dre crouched beside her. What happened before the ship crashed? Yanali didn't answer immediately. Then she said, they put her in the bright room. Dre's mind froze. What's the bright room? He asked. Yanali looked down. They said they were making her better, but she started shaking there. Dre's chest tightened. That wasn't a crash, he realized. That was an escape. He activated his ship's deeper scan array, the kind meant to read alien languages, power sources, and black box systems. The moment the scan began, Thess's body reacted, twitching violently, her arm flailing as if in pain. Alarms screamed. The med bay table locking her in place. Yanali cried out, and Dre jumped back. The lights flickered again. And then a voice came from Thess's mouth, not hers, but robotic and cold. Unauthorized probe detected. System reboot in process. Then silence. Thess went still, her body stiff like stone, her breathing shallow but steady. Yanali sobbed and hugged her tighter. Dre stood frozen, his mind racing. That wasn't a language barrier. That was programming. He stared at the med console, noticing something odd. Her body was rejecting all external tech, as if something inside her was blocking every attempt to read her biology. Dre had only seen this once before on failed hybrid experiments between machine and brain, projects so dangerous they had been banned on Earth decades ago. And yet, somehow, Thess had survived it. He walked to the control deck and activated the long-range signal jammer. He didn't know who might be watching, but something about that voice made his blood run cold. Experiment, it had said. Not patient, not pilot, experiment, back. In the med bay, Yanali was whispering again. Mommy, stay, don't go. Dre looked at the scans, the broken readings, the corrupted data, and one word kept flashing at the bottom of the screen: locked. Whatever was inside her body didn't want to be opened. But that meant something, or someone was trying to keep her that way. Dre didn't want to believe it, but a memory came back. Years ago, Earth's research division had tried to create hybrid AI linked to organic minds. They called it soft thread fusion. It was shut down after multiple test subjects went into permanent seizures. The project's lead scientist vanished, and the files were buried under government seal, until now. Dre opened a hidden archive on his console, typing in an old access key. It was still active, and when the logs appeared, he felt sick. Thess's neural map matched the design pattern of those failed Earth experiments. The only difference was the patterns had evolved before he could dig deeper. A proximity alert screamed through the ship. A foreign signal had just entered the edge of the system, silent, fast, and unregistered. Someone was tracking them. Dre shut down the interface and locked the medbay doors. He turned to Yanali and said, "We need to leave now." "But my mom, she's coming with us," he said firmly. "I'll stabilize her pod." He quickly loaded Tess into a portable cryobed, setting it to a low-energy state to reduce her neural activity. As he lifted the bed into the shuttle's escape pod, he noticed the trembling slowed just a little. It wasn't a cure, but it was a start. Yanali followed close behind, holding onto his jacket tightly. Outside the window, a shadow passed through. The Star's ship cloaked in black, moving without lights. They had minutes, maybe less. Dre activated the pod and launched it away from his main vessel, setting it toward an outlaw sector known for hiding fugitives. If anyone could decode what was inside Tess, it was the biohackers in the exile rings. But time was running out. Yanali sat silently as they flew, watching the stars pass by. "Why are they chasing us?" Dre asked. "Because you touched her," she said, voice barely a whisper. "That's how they find people." Dre stared ahead, a weight growing heavier in his chest. He hadn't just stepped into danger, he had become part of it, and now the only hope for the woman who couldn't be scanned was hiding in the hands of the only human who still cared enough to try. The broken memory core. The moment Dre connected the alien memory core to his system, the lights dimmed and his ship began to hum, a low vibration that echoed through the floor like a distant heartbeat. This wasn't normal. His fingers hovered over the console, but the machine responded before he touched anything. The core had connected on its own. "No input," he whispered. "It's reading me instead." He backed away, instincts telling him to pull the plug, but it was too late. Images began to flash across the screen, broken, fast, and strange. They weren't recordings. They were memories inside the med bay. Tess remained frozen inside the cryobed, her body still trembling but her eyes now blinking slowly. Yanali sat beside her mother, quiet, still, watching her breathe as if counting every rise and fall. She didn't notice the way the ship's systems began to shift, how the temperature dropped and the screens flickered again. But Dre did, and he saw something that made his blood run cold. The image of a human face, one he hadn't seen in years. A man in a white lab coat, glasses glowing from screen light, and a smile that never reached his eyes. Dr. Haven Merrick. His old mentor, dead for over a decade, or so everyone believed. What the hell is this? Dre muttered, eyes wide. The screen showed Haven walking through a facility filled with strange machines. Each room had alien mothers hooked into chairs, their heads covered with metal crowns. Their bodies shook, just like Tess's. One of them screamed silently, mouth wide open, no sound. The system had muted her pain. Dre's heart pounded as he realized what he was watching. These weren't test logs, they were torture sessions, disguised as progress. Then came the moment that made him stumble back. The video showed a young Tess, barely recognizable, being strapped down in a white room with bright lights. The same bright room Yanali had whispered about. And in the background, Dre saw his own research. Charts, code structures, memory mapping tools, all developed during his first year at the lab. They had taken his early work and turned it into something monstrous. His stomach turned as the screen flashed a message. Subject 7B linked to unstable human neural pattern. Observe effects. That was the final piece. Tess had been merged with a human neural map, his neural map. It wasn't a coincidence that Yanali had found him. It wasn't luck. It was design. Suddenly, the cryobed alarms went off. Dre ran to the med bay to find Tess thrashing inside. Her eyes wide open now, mouth trying to speak but failing. Yanali cried out, "She's awake, do something, please." Dre quickly activated the dampeners, slowing her heart rate and neural feedback. But as she calmed, her mouth opened again and a voice not hers spoke through the ship's comms. Experiment 7B confirmed alive. Human interface detected. Commence retrieval. Who's sending that? Dre shouted, looking around. No source, no transmission logs, no trace, just that voice. And then silence again. Yanali gripped his arm, her eyes wide with fear. They're coming, she said. You woke her up, now they know. Dre moved fast, shutting down every external signal, rerouting power, and jamming all outgoing links. But it was no use. A tracking beacon had already activated deep inside the memory core. Hidden beneath encryption, even he couldn't break. Someone had planned this from the beginning. He turned to Yanali, trying to stay calm. What's inside her? What did they do to her? Yanali looked at her mother with sorrow in her eyes. They tried to turn her into something that thinks like you, she said, but she didn't want to forget who she was. Dre understood now. They weren't just experimenting on alien minds. They were replacing them, wiping identity, rewriting memory, and forcing a human logic system onto other species. And Tess had resisted. That resistance, her shaking, her silence. The failures wasn't a malfunction. It was her fighting back. A warning beep sounded from the main deck. Dre ran to the controls and saw an incoming object moving fast. Zero ID, no transponder, no request. Just a sharp V-shaped dot racing toward them. Time to impact. 15 minutes. He had to move. He had to hide. He had to protect Yanali and Tess, no matter what. Dre downloaded the corrupted memory logs. Grabbing only what he could decrypt, he burned the rest, erasing any trace from the ship's systems. Then, he locked the medbay doors, activated emergency thrusters, and set course for a rogue planet known as Shadow's Belt. It was dangerous, filled with criminals and exiles, but he knew someone there, an alien cybersurgeon named Vexra. She was the only one mad enough to fix a living memory core. As the stars stretched and his ship went into hyperspace, Dre sat back, breathing hard. He didn't fully understand what Tess had become, but he now knew why she couldn't be scanned. Because she wasn't just a person anymore. She was a battlefield. And someone out there wanted to reclaim her, no matter how many they had to kill. Run. Don't breathe. Smoke hissed from the wall vents, cold and white like mist on a frozen lake. Dre knew instantly this wasn't natural. He didn't trigger any vent systems, and the filters weren't set for cryogas. This was injection. He slammed the emergency override on the bridge, but the control panel froze, not even a blink. That's when he heard it, a soft whirring from above, not part of his ship. He looked up and his stomach dropped. A thin black drone hovered in the air. Small like a floating insect, but its design was too clean, too advanced. It had found them before he could grab his blaster. The drone released a pulse, silent but deadly. The lights turned red, the walls began to hum, and Tess still in her cryo bed started to convulse again, harder than ever. Yanali screamed, covering her ears. Dre pulled her behind him, coughing as the mist started to sting his lungs. It wasn't gas, it was something else. A neural disruptor, targeting biological signals. Don't breathe, Dre said, grabbing a breather mask and shoving it onto Yanali's face. Then he yanked the power conduit from the wall and fried the drone with a surge of raw energy. The code? Little machine sparked and dropped like a stone. But the damage was done. Tess's body was seizing again. Even inside the cryobed, her heart rate spiked, and the cryogel began to bubble. Dre knew he couldn't stabilize her here, not with the ship compromised. They had to run. He didn't waste time. He triggered the ship's auto-evacuation protocol and prepped the escape module, small, fast, and barely armed. It wasn't safe, but it was the only option left. He lifted Tess's pod into the module while Yanali scrambled inside, eyes still watery and scared. Once everything was secure, he launched, and the pod rocketed away, leaving the main ship behind. Just as it exploded, the drone must have had a secondary charge planted deep in the control panel as the fireball faded behind them. Yanali said in a small voice, "Did we win?" Dre didn't answer, because the truth was they survived, but winning? Not yet. They drifted into deep space, heading toward the outlaw system known as Shadow's Belt, the only place where the rules were simple pay or perish. It was filled with biohackers, smugglers, black market tech dealers, and ex-government scientists who had burned every bridge behind them. And one of them owed Dre a favor. Her name was Vexra, a spiky, two-headed alien surgeon with a heart colder than vacuum and hands that could rebuild nervous systems in her sleep. When they finally landed on the rusted landing pad of Station K9, the air smelled like oil, ozone, and blood. Yanali clung to Dre's arm, her eyes darting at every figure in the shadows. Vexra's lab was hidden behind a broken wall sign that flickered in 4 languages, all of them warning people to stay out. Dre ignored it and walked straight in. The lab inside was worse than he remembered. Half-alive machines hung from the ceiling, twitching as they breathed. A table moved on its own, pushing aside blood-stained tools. Then a low voice echoed from the far wall. "I told you never to come back here." Vexra slithered out from behind a monitor stack, her twin heads blinking in unison. One head smirked, the other scowled. Dre stood tall. "You owe me." "Not for this," she said, looking at the shaking body inside the pod. "That's not a person." "That's a mistake." Dre didn't flinch. "She's my responsibility now," he said. "She has something in her, something you might want to see." Vexra rolled her lower eyes and waved them inside. Her tools buzzed to life, scanners, word, and wires slithered like snakes around the cryobed. She leaned in, observing Fess's neural data streams. Then she froze. The smirk on one face vanished, replaced by wide-eyed shock. "This isn't tech," she said slowly. "This is raw willpower, layered over forced programming. She's not broken, Dre. She's resisting." "Resisting what?" Dre asked. Vexra turned. "Erasure." She explained that the neural pattern inside Fess was mutating, creating new code to protect her identity. The shaking wasn't decay, it was evolution. But it was incomplete if they didn't finish the sequence. Her mind would burn itself out trying to survive. Dre asked the obvious question, "Can you help her?" Vexra nodded slowly. "I can, but I need access to the original memory code." Dre handed her the corrupted data chip he saved from the explosion. She looked at it and growled. "This is Haven Merrick's work. You brought the devil's code into my lab." The name hit hard. Yanali, sitting quietly nearby, whispered, "That's the man who made the bright room." Vexra tapped her claws together, thinking. "All right," she said, "I'll help. But if this thing wakes up and turns into a walking bomb, I'm blaming you." Dre nodded. "Fair." Vexra's machines wrapped around Fess, scanning every nerve, every thought, and in the background, her memory core pulsed like a heartbeat, stronger now. Dre didn't know what she would be when she woke up, but one thing was clear. She was still fighting. And they weren't running anymore, not now. Now they were preparing to fight back. Asterisk. Secrets buried in flesh. Asterisk. The lights above Fess's body turned blue, then violet, then pure white. Every scanner in Vexra's lab began to overload, their systems unable to keep up with the data pouring from her mind. She wasn't dying, she wasn't unconscious, she was remembering. Dre stepped back as a surge of heat passed through the room. Yanali stood frozen, clutching her hands over her chest, her eyes wide with hope and fear. Vexra's 2 heads argued softly in a coded alien tongue. One wanted to stop the procedure. The other insisted on continuing. Then both heads turned to Dre. "This isn't a healing process," she said. "It's a countdown." "What do you mean?" Dre asked, already dreading the answer. "She's not recovering, she's activating." Dre looked at the pulse monitor, and it finally made sense. Every second, her brain activity doubled, creating new neural links. Vexra pulled up the core interface and decrypted a hidden message burned deep inside the memory sequence. The words that appeared chilled the room. "Final protocol engaged human interface. Identified core awakening begins." Yanali stepped closer to her mother, and Fess's fingers twitched. Dre rushed forward, trying to pull the child back, but she shook her head. "She knows I'm here," Yanali whispered. "She remembers me now." Vexra turned away from the console and crossed her arms. She's part machine, Dre, she said. But the human part, the emotional memory, it's all connected to you. Me? You were the first donor, Vexra said. They copied your neural structure years ago for the fusion trials. They built her around the way you think, the way you feel. That means if she fully wakes up, she'll be you, but not you. Dre backed away, overwhelmed. He had unknowingly become the blueprint for an alien mind, but Tess had fought back, bent the system from the inside, and buried herself in corrupted code just to survive. Now that she was resurfacing, question remained: who would she be, the real Tess, or a twisted reflection of him? Suddenly, the walls of the lab shook, an explosion boomed from above, followed by red emergency lights blinking in the ceiling. Vexra cursed, pulling open a side screen. A swarm of black-cloaked figures descended from a stealth ship that had breached Station K9's upper deck. No signals, no warnings, just silence, and then violence. They're here, Vexra said, grabbing a plasma blade. Go to the back exit now. Dre pushed the cryobed forward, Yanali close behind. They entered a dark tunnel lined with storage crates, sparks dropping from wires overhead. Tess's body started to shake again, this time not from pain, but from energy. She was glowing now, her skin lit from within by pulses of green light that rippled across her veins. Her mind was awake, not fully, but almost there. Dre could feel it, like pressure in the air before a lightning strike. The walls began to react to her presence, lights bending, machines twitching, gravity shifting slightly. Yanali held her hand gently, whispering, "Come back, Mommy." Vexra caught up with them at the next hatch, slamming it shut behind her. I slowed them down, she said, panting, but not for long. Then she paused, looking at Tess with something close to fear. I saw this once before, she said, on a test subject we thought had died. They called it neuroflare syndrome. The body starts reshaping itself to protect core memory, pure biodefensive evolution. And when it finishes, it burns everything that doesn't belong. Dre clenched his fists. What happens if she decides I don't belong? Vexra didn't answer. Suddenly, Tess's hand rose slowly, pointing at a rusted chamber ahead. Yanali gasped. She wants us to go there. Dre pushed the bed forward, guided by Tess's weak signals. Inside the chamber was a deep neural interface machine, ancient, illegal, and dangerous. Vexra looked at it and shook her head. That's a core linker, she said. Only two minds can enter at once, and only one comes out whole. Tess opened her eyes and whispered a single word through dry lips: Dre. He stepped forward, understanding what she needed. She wants me to enter her mind, he said. She can't fight this alone. Yanali grabbed his arm. Please come back, Dre nodded, then placed a hand on the cold metal of the core linker and connected the cable to his temple. Start it, he said to Vexra. She hesitated, then flipped the switch. The world around him vanished, replaced by a storm of light and sound. He found himself standing in a dark hall, walls flickering with broken images, Tess's memories. He saw her as a child, her first laughter, her first dance, her first moment of terror in the bright room. Then him, memories of him. But not from her life, from the memory pattern she was given. He was inside her mind, and she had kept pieces of him, close guides to survive. Now the only way to bring her back was to face the shadow trying to erase her, and that shadow wore his mentor's face. Welcome, Subject 7B, the shadow said, smiling coldly. I've come to finish what we started. Dre stepped forward, heart steady. No, he said. I've come to set her free. The mind reforged, asterisk. He opened his eyes, but the world was wrong. There was no floor beneath his feet, no ceiling above, just endless floating fragments of light and shadow. He stood in a space that felt like a dream, but heavier, more painful, more real than reality ever allowed. Dre was no longer in a body, he was in her mind. The core linker had worked. Now he stood inside the scattered consciousness of Tess. But instead of clarity, he found chaos. Screams echoed in the dark. Alien voices, human commands, static from old machines. The crying of a child Yanali, each sound came from a glowing memory fragment drifting around him. Some were bright and whole, others cracked and shaking, trying to disappear. Then he saw. Her, Thess, or what was left of her, stood across a broken bridge of light, her figure flickering like a damaged hologram. She looked afraid, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, trembling. She wasn't shaking from malfunction anymore, she was shaking from being hunted. Dre started toward her, but a shape stepped between them. It was tall, human-shaped, but its face was wrong, too smooth, too perfect. And behind the smoothness, two eyes opened, cold, intelligent, and familiar. "Hello again," Dre said. The voice, it was Haven Merrick, the man who stole his research, vanished and built a living weapon out of Thess's mind. Here, inside this digital mental battlefield, Haven was no longer a man. He was a program, a shadow written into Thess's core, made to erase her and take full control. "You can't win here," the voice said calmly. "She belongs to the system now." Dre clenched his fists, even though he had no real hands in this space. "She doesn't belong to anyone," he said, "especially not to you." With a shout, he ran forward, crashing into the shadow, but instead of clashing, they merged. Suddenly, Dre was being dragged into memories that weren't his. He saw Thess's pain, the lab table, the bright room, the injections, the slow loss of identity, and woven through it all his own thoughts, taken from the neural map they'd stolen. He fought back, pulling those thoughts apart, separating himself from the implanted commands. Bit by bit, he carved away the lies, shielding Thess's core memories from deletion. He found a glowing thread, her first memory of Yanali, and another, her escape through a vent with bleeding feet and her child in her arms. He held on to those, building them into a wall around her identity. Haven appeared again, this time as fire, burning the bridge beneath Thess. Dre ran forward and caught her as she fell. She looked into his eyes and whispered, "I'm still me." Together they rose, her form growing brighter, clearer, more real. The shaking stopped, not because she was cured, but because she was awake, outside, in the real world. Vexra watched in disbelief as Thess's body straightened in the cryobed. Her glowing veins pulsed steady now, no longer erratic, no longer breaking. Yanali stepped forward, tears in her golden eyes. "Mommy?" she whispered, inside the mindscape. Thess stood tall now, her presence solid and unshakable. She turned to the shadow of Haven and said, "You do not own me." Then she touched his chest, and he shattered into data, dust scattered across the mental sky. Dre opened his eyes back in the real world, gasping for breath. His body ached, sweat poured from his forehead. And Thess was sitting upright in the pod, holding Yanali gently in her arms. The shaking had stopped completely. Vexra stared, speechless. "You rewrote the ending," she whispered. "That was supposed to be irreversible." Dre stood slowly, his legs weak but his heart steady. "She rewrote it herself," he said. "I just helped her remember who she was." Thess looked at him, and for the first time, her eyes were fully conscious, no haze, no fear. She opened her mouth and spoke. "Thank you," Yanali beamed. Hugging her mother tightly, Dre leaned against the wall, breathing hard. The war inside her mind was over. But the people who made that war, who tried to turn beings into machines, were still out there. And now they would come with even more force, because the only experiment to ever wake up had just survived and remembered everything. Thess stood beside Dre, her voice firm but warm. "We'll need help," she said. "Others are still trapped." "Like I was," Dre nodded. "Then we fight." The memory core inside her chest pulsed softly, no longer in crisis, but ready, alive and human. At least in part. Together, they stepped into the corridor, not as rescuer and rescued, but as allies. With a mission no one else had dared to take on. Asterisk, the human key. Asterisk, the transmission didn't come from a ship or a beacon. It came from Thess herself. The memory core inside her chest glowed, and a quiet hum vibrated through the hidden base where They took shelter. She stood in the center of the old chamber, eyes closed, arms relaxed, as the signal pulsed outward. Vexra's console lit up with a warning. "You're broadcasting," she said, alarmed. Dre turned to Tess. "What are you doing?" Tess opened her eyes slowly, and for the first time, her voice didn't shake. "I'm calling the ones they buried." The signal spread across deep space frequencies, encrypted, ancient, and buried under decades of silence. It wasn't a cry for help, it was a wake-up call, somewhere out in the stars. Other failed experiments, part mind, part machine, received the pulse, and deep in abandoned labs, cold systems blinked awake for the first time in years. Back inside the base, Yanali stood beside her mother, watching with quiet pride. She didn't understand all the science, but she understood this: her mother was no longer broken. She was leading. Dre stepped outside, watching the stars overhead. Ships were already on the move. He knew it before the sensors confirmed it. A shadow fleet, silent and invisible, was coming to shut Tess down. But this time, she wouldn't be running. And neither would he inside. Tess pulled up the last remaining memory logs Dre had saved. She found the names of the other subjects, children, adults, elders used in hybrid experiments and then discarded. "They erased these people," she said, her hands tightening into fists. "But we're going to bring them back." Vexra paced behind her, uneasy. "If you go public with this, every syndicate, lab and power broker in the galaxy will want your head." Tess nodded. "They already do. The decision was made, Dre, Tess, Yanali." And Vexra prepared the base for what was coming next. The child helped where she could, carrying cables, holding tools, and asking questions no one had simple answers to. But it was her voice that gave Dre hope when she whispered, "I think the others will be like her, too scared, but strong." Then the sky changed. The fleet arrived. Black ships with no emblems appeared in orbit, their weapons charged but not firing. They were waiting, listening. Dre activated the comm system, unsure of what to say. But Tess stepped forward, her voice calm. "To those who control minds and erase names," she said, "I have a message. You failed." She pressed a hand against the console, and her memory core shared everything: videos of the bright rooms, the torture, the experiments. Every secret they tried to bury now screamed across the stars. Then, one of the ships in orbit broke formation. It turned and left, then another, and another. Some who had come to silence her realized what she truly was: not a weapon, but proof. Proof that identity could survive the worst machines. Proof that even in silence, a voice can be rebuilt. Down below, Dre watched it happen, and he understood. Something deep, something unshakable. Tess was never the weapon. He had been. His neural pattern, his humanity, was the key they had tried to force into another species. But Tess had reshaped it, made it hers, and in doing so, she had done what no machine ever could choose. When the broadcast ended, silence fell over the stars, but it was the kind of silence that comes before change. A stillness full of meaning, not fear. Tess turned to Dre. "Your kindness," she said, "was the key they never understood. They tried to clone your thoughts, but not your choices. That's what made me survive." Dre said nothing, but his eyes said everything. He reached out and held her hand, and for a moment, there was no war, no danger, just connection. Yaneli rushed to them, wrapping her arms around both. Vexra raised a brow at the moment and muttered, "Soft-hearted fools." But she didn't stop smiling. In the days that followed, survivors began to send signals back, the ones who heard Tess's call. Some were broken, some hiding, some barely alive, but now they had a voice, a place to return to, a cause. Together, they rebuilt, not for war, but for memory, for choice, for freedom. And in the heart of it all, stood one girl who once whispered, "Please fix my mom, she won't stop shaking." Now that same girl smiled at her mother, not because she had been fixed, but because she had been found. Not erased, not rewritten, but remembered.